Thank you all for coming today to our last talk of Outside Our Bubble. Today's specific topic is going to be self-care and hope. So on that note, I'm just going to introduce myself. I'm going to be your guys' moderator for today. My name is Destiny Trujillo. I'm a current senior at Walnut High School. Super excited to be here with you guys today. I'm in ASB. I'm in class cabinet. I've been playing polo for the past 4 years, so this will be my 4th year. Today, we're just going to be going over, how to stay helpful, especially in times when there's so many crazy social, political issues going on. And we're going to be going over self-care, mental care. Just a heads up, this conversation is being recorded, but because you guys obviously don't have your faces in the boxes, your personal information isn't going to be tracked down. We're just doing it for privacy purposes. If you have any questions throughout the talk, you can submit it to the titles named Submit Questions Here, and then we can answer them throughout the conversation. Obviously, we won't be able to get every single question in, but we hope to cover a majority of them. So on that note, I'm going to introduce our lovely speakers today, starting with Mr. Johnson.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for spending your time here with us today. My name is Mr. Johnson. I used to be a GLC over at Walnut High School, and I'm currently an assistant principal in the Corona Norco Unified School District. I'm excited about the opportunity to get to talk with you guys today about self-care and hope. So I hope this is enjoyable for us all. And if you have any questions, as Destiny said, please submit them and we'll get them answered for you.
And then next, we're going to have Miss Nicole Yap introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nicole, and I graduated from Walnut High in 2012. I'm currently a grad student at USC. I'm studying to become, hopefully, your future school counselor. And what I like to do on my free time is to read a book, play some music. I play piano, and I also like to practice yoga. And I'm going to pass it on to Fernanda.
Awesome. My name is Fernanda. I actually was class of 2016, and Mr. Johnson was actually my GLC for my junior and senior year. I was involved in peer counseling and class cabinet. But now, after graduating at UCR, I went there, got my bachelor's degree in psychology and with a minor in public policy. So I just graduated this June, and I was involved in peer mentoring there and also in some research as well.
Thank you for introducing yourselves. So on that note, we're kind of just going to start diving in. So I know that Twitter and social media just can be really overwhelming, especially in light of the whole George Floyd situation. So I kind of want to go over self-care in the context of racism or supporting the Black Lives Matter movement. I know a lot of students that are in my grade. I saw a lot of Walnut High School alumni at the past rally at Mount Sac. So how do you deal with feeling overwhelmed, and what did you do personally, Fernanda, to deal with that kind of situation?
So I definitely, when this whole event happened and George Floyd was murdered and it was caught on camera, it actually took me a while to bring myself to watch the video, just because I knew how graphic it would be. But when I did finally watch it, I just started to feel overwhelming emotions of anger, rage, sadness, frustration, even more so because I felt like I really couldn't do anything just from looking at things on my phone. I felt like I needed to do something more in person, and because of this whole pandemic, that's something that isn't always possible for everyone. But I did notice that my social media was bombarded with so many different scenarios of not just with George Floyd, but other people that have been, just been experiencing injustice. A lot of Black folks that have essentially, also being murdered or being discriminated against, and that was just very frustrating and overwhelming. Even, you know, from just watching it on Twitter or even Instagram. And so I'm sure most of us can relate to that. Our social medias were bombarded and everything like that. And I did notice that my screen time was going up, and I was having more conversations that I originally had with my, I would originally have with my family about racism and injustices that Black community would experience. But I also noticed that once my emotions were fluctuating that way, I had to kind of essentially put a stop to how much time I was dedicating to that. Even though it's important to educate yourself on what's going on in the world, there's other times where you need to put your energy into yourself as well, which, you know, sometimes that could look like making a screen time timer or something like that. If you have an iPhone, I'm not 100% sure if it's available on Android, but you can put like a screen timer where you can essentially limit the amount of time that you have on certain social media, or you can dedicate a certain amount of time for that outlet. Like sometimes what I would do is, because Twitter is essentially my own newspaper, I would read it in the morning. I would scroll through a couple posts, things like that. And then once I was ready to go have breakfast or just get on with my day, especially because I was still in school, I would just go ahead and move on to that. But there's other ways that you can try to ease that overwhelming feeling, and it doesn't necessarily have to do with like limiting the amount of screen time that you have, but that can also look like just spending more time you know, talking about it with the people around you. That's what I started doing. You know, my family and I would have these discussions about just like maybe how we can be better allies and be better community members. And so those are kind of conversations, and those are kind of tricky to have just depending on your own situation. But of course, that's an outlet that you can have is, you know, your friends or your family, just being able to talk through these things.
Thank you. And I think in light of that situation, a lot of students kind of find themselves in the middle of, you know, where do you distinguish helping others and helping yourself? You know, how do you balance, should I binge watch Friends on Netflix, or should I educate myself and watch 13th on Netflix? So how do you kind of balance going about helping others and then helping yourselves? Nicole, would you mind kind of clarifying that for us?
Sure. So one thing that I always keep with me is a journal and a calendar. I've created my own bullet journal for the year. And, you know, as a full-time student, I do have other responsibilities too. So that allows me to see where I'm putting my time, where I'm putting my energy, and how much of that time is dedicated to my own work, being there for my family, speaking with my friends, and also educating myself about the Black Lives Matter movement. So I do spend enough time for each one, but I do agree with what Fernanda said about, you know, how sometimes you just want to help with the cause, but it does get overwhelming. So some other things that I do is I tap into what we know now is self-care, and that there are actually different types. So physical self-care, that's doing things to improve your own physical health. For me, that looks like doing my best to sleep earlier, drinking enough water, and going outside and walking around the neighborhood or something. There's also emotional or psychological self-care. So that could look like learning a new skill or just thinking about the things that inspire you, motivate you. And for me, that looks like journaling, and that also taps into the spiritual side of my self-care. So for me, journaling encompasses that, where I'm thinking about what I'm doing and my role when I am engaging in supporting the cause. but also stepping back to see how I'm feeling about the situation, because a lot of it is, it's it can be heavy, and sometimes people are more supportive than others, and that's totally okay. And also just I'm also learning to accept the fact that some people are just not aware, they have different views, especially with family. Those are some of the harder conversations to have. But tapping into those different types of self-care has been very helpful. So I would definitely encourage you all to explore what it is that explore the things that work for you, and just do your best to get through the day and do the things that give you energy as well.
Thank you. And before, I start moving on to next topics, Mr. Johnson or Fernanda, do you have anything else to kind of add to what Nicole gave us?
Yes, I think she hit on an important point with self-care. Self-care it isn't selfish, right? It's necessary. And so everyone has a different way about how they do it. Nicole talked about journaling, and one of the things that I think is important to do as well is, spending that time kind of with yourself, whether that be journaling. I know Fernanda talked about, limiting her time on social media. But I think self-care kind of starts with just spending time with yourself and unplugging. So I agree with what they said, and it's also something that I would recommend students do. And it's also something that I do myself as well, getting outside, unplugging from all the media consumption, and just spending some time in your thoughts.
Just to add to that, for the most part, just finding what you like to do. I think that's also like what your interest is. I think Nicole really tapped into that. I'm not really good at painting, but somehow I found myself painting a lot more during the pandemic and during this time, because it was a way for myself to just let go of everything that was around me. Even though it's very important to stay aware and educated about different situations, it's like how Mr. Johnson was saying, to tap into yourself and knowing that you're also taking care of yourself.
Thank you. And I think another important topic to bring to light, especially for high school students, is just to kind of go over like why it's important to take care of ourselves. A lot of us don't even know like what self-care or mental care means in depth, and especially during times where we're in social distancing and we're going through the school year virtually, we're kind of deprived of having those one-on-one connections and like physical interactions with each other. Would any of the speakers kind of mind just opening up why it's important that we need to take care of ourselves and we need to dedicate time to that subject?
Absolutely. I'll start. Kind of as I said before, I think the first part of self-care is just realizing it's not a selfish thing. It's a necessity. And before you can help someone else, you have to be in a position of being able to, take care of yourself. And so I think many times in the conversations that I've had with people, right, with students and or adults or families, is realizing that, first off, it's okay to take care of yourself. And then second, how do you do that, right? There's different ways to do it. For many students, I think many students I've spoken, they like to listen to music or maybe spend time being creative, or just getting out of their house or wherever they are at. But it can also extend to, in many cases, just getting some rest, right? Having going to sleep, having a schedule, and setting goals for yourself, long-term and short-term goals, because it gives you something to look forward to. It's something that you can have hope in. And so there's number one, realizing it's not selfish to do it, but two, setting boundaries and limiting yourself also helps with self-care, because you don't want to be spread too thin.
Just to touch upon what Mr. Johnson was saying, whenever my students would ask me why do I need to why do I need to dedicate time in my week to myself, to just rest or to do nothing, or to do something that they're interested in, or that's not related to the academics or not related to certain projects that they're doing. And I always bring this, like the airplane scenario. When they're giving you, if you've ever flown on a plane, they always, give you instructions about an emergency, that like if there happens to the oxygen mask happen to come down, you should put on yours first and then go ahead and help others afterward, putting on the mask for them if they need it. So, and that's, because if you don't have that mask on first, you're going to be running out of oxygen, and you're not going to be able to help the people around you later on, because you're also like lacking that, you're essentially like giving your life up for another person. Even though it seems very heroic and something that's very noble to do, you also need to have that strength and that energy to put that same energy into other things that you're doing. So if you're replenishing yourself and you're allowing yourself to re-energize and to you're essentially taking care of yourself, you're able to take care of other people, and you're probably going to be doing a much better job of helping others, of taking care of others, if you're taking care of yourself too. What I've noticed in my family dynamics is if I have some things that I haven't been dealing with, like making sure I get enough sleep, or I'm eating 3 or 4 meals a day, whatever that might look like for however whatever your diet might look like in a day, you start to get grouchy, and you start to get frustrated with people, and you're not really able to take care of other people's what they might be expecting of you as well, in whatever kind of role that you might have. So if you're not taking care of yourself, literally like sleeping, eating, resting, whatever that might be, then you're less able to take care of other people. And I think that's the reason why I say it's very important to do so.
I totally agree with that. You said that beautifully, Fernanda. And also, I also want to mention, when you do take care of yourself, you will do a much better job taking care of other people, and you may find yourself wanting to be more proactive about it as well. Instead of, you might even get creative. I know for me, that's what I have kind of been doing. Instead of just saying, hey, how are you? I would make more of an effort to cook a meal for my family so that my mom doesn't have to do it. Or maybe that's just sharing one thing to another person that you really appreciate about them. And also echoing what Mr. Johnson said about setting boundaries, that is super important. Because when you set boundaries, you're also taking care of yourself, instead of, and that it's okay to say no sometimes, but in a way that doesn't necessarily hurt the other person. You can, for example, you can say, no, sorry, I don't think I can talk about this subject right now, but if you call me tomorrow, I can see what I can do to help. And that is just another way to go about it. So as you're talking to your friends, your family, your loved ones, that can also be seen as a way of practicing self-care.
Thank you. That was all, I think, really great advice, especially for us high school students, when mental health, as far as stress, anxiety, those kinds of things in our lives are so looked over, and we never really focus on those kinds of problems. So how do you know when you should take a break, or, take the time to self-evaluate yourself? Like, when do you know that you're not in your normal element?
There's a way I'll say for students, but because I know that's the platform, but it's a people thing too, right? So even for myself, Usually if I'm unable to focus, if I'm grouchy, if I'm feeling frustrated all the time, there's rapid weight gain or rapid weight loss. Those are usually signs like, okay, I need to stop, I need to slow down, and I need to take a break and take care of myself. And it will be the same thing that I tell students, and I have told students as well, is when you start to notice these are symptoms of your body telling you, look at me, take care of me, take care of me. And those things are important. So when you start to see those signs of being unable to focus, unable to sleep, feeling ill, frustrated, that's usually a sign that you're being spread thin. And, kind of what Nicole talked about, and I talked about a little earlier, usually during those times, your boundaries have been moved around, or there may not be any at all. And so that's a perfect time to really remind yourself that self-care isn't selfish, and that self-care should have a higher priority than giving care, and learning how to say no in those moments.
For me, when I start to notice where, my emotions start to get a little bit more heightened, I start to get a little bit more frustrated. I interact with, my family a lot. I interact with, I live separate from my family as well. So I have other housemates, and there's times where just even people are just talking to me normal or something, and after a long day, or I've been overwhelmed with different things I need to get done, I start to get a little bit grouchy at just like these small little things. I also have a younger sister, so sometimes we're just talking and something kind of like sets me off, and I know, okay, maybe I shouldn't be feeling this way, even though she, talked to me pretty normally. So those are kind of signs, at least for me, when I start to notice that maybe I need to take care of myself. So that might look different to other people, just depending on how you interact with the world. I think whenever how we interact with the people around us is usually like a very obvious flag about how we feel inside with ourselves. So that can be, like how I was saying, very frustrated, or even when there's some things that normally don't like piss you off or get you mad, like online, that is kind of like a meme or something like that. And you're like, why are they saying that? And it starts to get you like really, really angry or frustrated with whatever the joke is. Like maybe then, kind of just take a step back a little bit and be like, why am I angry at that? Like, what is going on in my own life?
When everything becomes a trigger, it's not.
Exactly. When everything becomes a trigger, that's when you know that you should be taking care of yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah, I do feel similar to that. I do notice that my patience is spread very thin. I'm moody, I'm grouchy, and it does show with the physical symptoms. Maybe I didn't drink enough water that day. Maybe I hadn't eaten enough. And then I notice that affects my productivity levels. So I'm procrastinating. I'm not getting my homework done. And I notice that, oh, well, I'm a little more sensitive to that subject today, and maybe I'm less likely to take a joke. So yes, really stepping back, taking a step back to see, okay, there's something not right and I have to do something to take care of me. And again, journaling really helps, playing music really helps, and just exploring what works for you.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And thank you for giving that insight, especially because I feel that we live in a society where, mental health is not taken as seriously as it should, or especially when you're like, I know for me, I'm Hispanic, and my grandma's like, depression, what is that? So how do you go about dealing with those issues when people don't take your mental health seriously? Or even for young men, many people think that men should oppress their feelings, and especially when you're a teenager and it's such a pivotal developmental growth period in your life, how do you deal with, number one, dealing with those problems where people aren't taking you seriously, and number two, if you're kind of on the minority side of the spectrum where people think you shouldn't have those issues?
in the conversations that I've had with many families, families of color or families who don't necessarily believe in the whole mental health thing or counseling or what I tend to do is when I have those conversations with the students, first developing a relationship with the student and them having that conversation with me, I should say. I've always encouraged them to let me have that conversation as their counselor with the family. And it's not necessarily a conversation to convince the family that I'm right and they're wrong, but it gives me an opportunity to explain to the families the necessities and the importance of mental health. And just recently, I had a family who their student was having some ideations with suicide and some other harmful things. And part of their belief system wasn't seeking outside help, but being able to have a relationship with the student, getting them help on campus. The good part of this story is that the family came around because they saw how it was helping their kid, and they loved their son, and so they wanted to help him. So eventually, they were willing to do some things that are different. But in that same situation, he was a young man, and so with young men, they typically try to do everything themselves. It's the whole machismo or macho thing, and so one of the things that I think can help young men as they seek out mental health and help is first asking for help. That's that's the number one thing. Most young men don't want to ask for help because they want to defeat it themselves. But encouraging them to ask, and it's not always necessarily in the verbal communication kind of as we're doing now, but it could be in a way in which it's electronic, whether it be email or a friend of that person can ask for help. But asking for the help is one of the best ways, and honestly, the entry into receiving the support that you need.
Just to piggyback off of what Mr. Johnson was saying, I think it's very easy for us to say, take care of yourself and prioritize yourself, and but it can be very difficult to live that out, especially if your family does not believe in mental health being a priority. I can definitely relate with Destiny. My mom, sometimes she would mention like, oh, like it's fine, like you're just get over it, it's gonna be okay, like and those are the things that kind of like don't make it better. And honestly, sometimes it might make it worse, because then you might disregard those feelings or try to bottle them up a little bit more, whatever that might be. But I think what I would like y'all to take more into consideration is you taking your mental health seriously. Because even though it's our family or friends might be important to us and things like that, but your own life is important, and your own emotions and all of those things are valid. What you're feeling is 100% valid. And essentially, Mr. Johnson, when he was my counselor, he was very helpful to me and my family and my sister during very difficult time that we were having for our own financial instability and things that we were going through during that time. And so we had a lot of overwhelming emotions and things that were affecting us in school. So he was a really, really good support, part of our support network during that time. And so even though you might not find a support network in your family or the friends that are close to you, you might find it elsewhere. You might find it with people at school. I found that Walnut staff is very, very dedicated to students. I'm from another city. I was an out of district student, and I could compare the difference between Walnut High School and other high schools that I was supposed to go to, and they didn't have the same amount of dedication or want or desire to help the students or maybe it's because of resources, maybe because of just their own philosophies. You know, I'm not necessarily sure about that, but if you can't find the support network in your own social circles, it's good to find it elsewhere. That might be a counselor at school. It might be at a hotline, a suicide hotline. It might be other professional. You know, if you have insurance, you have a doctor, you might be able to go seek out psychological help there. You know, there's different things that you can look for, and even the counselors at Walnut, they're supposed to be able to help you with that, to connect you to those things. I'm not sure how things are now that I've graduated a couple years back, but they have resources, and they're willing to give you those resources and help you in any way that they're able to.
Thank you. I totally agree. Mr. Johnson, he was here when I was a freshman. He was always super helpful to me amongst various other counselors. So I totally agree. Just to kind of switch topics, I know we're talking a lot about mental health, but I think a really big segue of mental health is being hopeful and being optimistic, especially on social media, and especially during 2020 when everything has such a negative connotation and everything's being like compared to every awful thing ever, like the Ronnie and Sam relationship, like it's just total toxicity. You know, could you guys open up the platform of how we stay hopeful and how we don't completely just close ourselves in and just think that, you know, everything's being run down? How do we go about remaining optimistic and keeping a positive spectrum in our mindset?
So I really like this topic, and I guess my advice would be just understand that when you're scrolling through social media, people only post pictures of their highlight reel. They really just want you to see what they want you to see. So when you're seeing your friend, you know, hanging out and just hanging out with a group of friends, and you're staying home, you know, you don't know what else is going on in their life. And so just going back to staying optimistic and hopeful, I hope that sheds some light onto how you can take more control of what you have, as opposed to focusing all your energy on what other people are doing, because at the end of the day, everyone is just doing the best that they can to get through the day. And also, it's also okay to not feel happy or positive, optimistic all the time. We are definitely in some difficult, some unprecedented times, but, you know, going back to the self-care aspect and just little by little doing things that you enjoy, doing things that you like, can really help. And so I hope that you find solitude in knowing that you have your goals to work towards, that you have some sort of purpose to fulfill. And I think that's all that you can focus on at this time.
I agree absolutely with Nicole. I know, you know, the acronym FOMO, you know, the fear of missing out, it's real. You know, and people don't want to feel like they're missing out on something. And but oftentimes when you're focused on what everyone else is doing, those feelings of frustration, you know, being unhappy, being unable to focus, you know, come to light. And so the problem sometimes with that is focusing on what others are doing and looking at everything as an opportunity for something that you can do. And what the reality of it is, we all have different lives and different circumstances. Everyone in life does go through struggle at some point. And as Nicole said, you know, people tend to post their best self online. And so if you're reading through timelines, you go, man, this person is always happy, or they're always vacationing, or they always getting the latest this or that. Remember, they're posting their highlights. You know, most people don't post the lowlights. And typically when they do, it's usually a scream for help. And so one of the things that I think can help people or students feel hopeful is to start your day and end your day with something positive. And what I mean by that is don't start your day on social media. Start your day with maybe talking to someone, getting out, doing one of those things. We talked about being creative, whether it be journaling, writing, or cooking, or painting. Start your day with something that you truly enjoy, and don't start your day with something that someone else is doing or reporting on. And another thing that I like to tell people is focus on setting goals, long-term and short-term goals for yourself. Because when you're working towards something, that's a great way for self-care, because you're focused on you being a better you in whatever that is. And you don't have to focus on what someone else is doing. And so if you're starting your day with a goal, you're starting your day unplugged from media consumption, whether that be social, TV, or whatever, it helps you to have hope, because you're working from something within and you're working towards something. And so that would be my suggestion.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, it's definitely a thing where people, only post their best selves or the best version of them on social media. But at least in the context of right now, where, we are seeing a lot of negative events, we are seeing a lot of people being, racist, or even people dying because of racism or things like that. It can get very, very, you can start feeling a lot of hopelessness, a lot of helplessness, a lot of things of, you start to think that, wow, things are really not going to get better. And some ways that I at least combat this, and something that's been taught to me as well, like from, my mom, sometimes I would tell her, I don't want to work in this. I don't want to be in this sort of specific career. She wanted me to become a psychiatrist, and I didn't really want to do that. And so I explained to her why I didn't want to do it, because I felt like there was a lot of corruption and, big pharma and like just different things, and how it was just basically what I had thought, psychiatry was, which is not necessarily true. But she kept telling me, like, how do you expect things to change if you're not the one, in there changing those things? And so, like, maybe that's something that we can kind of put our efforts in and our hope in, is that maybe even though all of these bad things are going on, we're still sticking to what is right and what we believe is right. And then as well as, just even the more practical things, there's a lot of things on YouTube that a lot of people really like to watch. There's certain YouTubers that you like to subscribe to. I, for one, I love watching Creative Weirdos, which they renovate spaces for people. They do a lot of interior designing. And so I like to watch those things when I feel like I want to see something that would make me happy or make me cry or tears of joy, things like that. Like there's, we are all aware that, everything is an algorithm, at least on the internet. When you start seeing negative things and you start retweeting negative things, or certain events are going on in the world, bad things heightened and around us, and we start seeing those things more often than good things, like good moments, when people are accomplishing things, or just people are doing things that make them happy, or they're celebrating certain things. And so I think it's important for us to, even though we're seeing all those negative things, to kind of go out of our way to find those outlets of essentially, if that's, I believe it's John, I forgot his name. I know him just by Jim from The Office. He started a channel about like the good things that are happening out in the world. I love him. I don't know his last name, his real last name, because, but yes, John Kransky. Yes.
Yeah.
I can't even pronounce it, but yeah, like those kind of outlets, those kind of channels where they focus on good things. So they're definitely out there, but we just have to kind of look for them a little bit.
Thank you. I think I took a lot away from that, and I'm the moderator today. So thank you all for shedding light on that. To kind of further elaborate, would any of you mind giving more insight on how to, assess the situation about the negativity in regards to social media, the pressures, like Mr. Johnson said, FOMO, go over like cancel culture. I know a lot of people, like some people are out here kind of thinking that they're being one way on the internet, but it extends into bullying. How do you deal with like the negative pressures and seeing that much aggravation on the internet?
I think that's a very heavy topic. At least for myself, when I was in high school, my family, I really wouldn't go out. My family wouldn't allow me to go to parties or, be laid out. If I was out with my friends, I would have to be home at 8 p.m. Or I would have to tell them, my friends like social security numbers or like where their parents lived or what they were, occupation was. Like they would ask me like those kinds of questions. Of course I wouldn't disclose people's social security numbers, but because I didn't know them. But at least for that, like it was definitely, I experienced a lot of FOMO, especially because most of my friends, they would go out, out to eat or to different events and stuff like that I wasn't really able to do. So at least when I was experiencing that, I did feel a lot of loneliness. I felt a lot of like I didn't have that like those close friendships that other people had. But I during that time I dedicated myself a lot to other types of ways of entertaining myself. Like I got involved in church, and I'm not saying go to church and get involved in church or whatever, because I'm not one to push religion on people or anything like that, but I really got close to, people from my church back home, or I would also take up a lot of hiking. I actually started hiking in college. I started backpacking, so that was something that I really that just started from, doing those little things in high school. So there's things that even though you're not doing with your friends, there's things that you can really do alone, and I urge you to explore what makes you happy, and what makes because being alone sometimes is a blessing. I'm sure like sometimes like you just get tired of being around the same people all the time, or there's times where you wish that you had a little what is it, like a moment of isolation from, whether it is your family or your friends or whatever it might be. And then it's not necessarily bad, but you need to be able to be okay with being alone, and because it can be helpful in the long run, because you start understanding yourself, and you start understanding what you like and what you don't like, something like that.
Speaking of high school, especially during COVID, how do students deal with, losing important milestones like prom, graduation, senior sunrise, their major sporting events, not knowing what will happen? How do students go about dealing with those kinds of anxious pressures?
Yeah, that's hard. This year, there's a lot of students obviously who missed out on things that they were looking forward to for 4 years. And it just, it creates the atmosphere, or I guess it makes present in the atmosphere that there's a lot of uncertainty. And so when dealing with uncertainty, or Fernanda talked about being, or loneliness, I think one of the things that it almost sounds counterintuitive is usually during those times, those are the best times to think about how you can help someone or lend yourself to a cause, because it takes the focus off of you per se, and it helps. One of the activities that when I speak with students that that they tend to do, or that I encourage, is when you're feeling that way, right? You missed out on something, or you're feeling lonely, write a letter to someone. You know, that might be old school because people don't really write like they used to, but writing a letter to someone, create something for someone, buy something for someone. But typically in those instances, if you're thinking about others, it kind of helps take the mind off of, you know, what you're missing out on. Because I said before, like FOMO is it's a real thing. But at the same time, understanding that life is uncertain. And, you know, when you're in high school, you know, you go, okay, I got 4 years to be here. This is what ninth grade is going to look like. 10th grade is going to look like, so on and so forth. And then in your head, you know, I remember my 14, 15, 16-year-old self, you go, okay, this is how life is going to be. And then you graduate high school and you go, whoa, this isn't what I thought. This isn't what I thought it was. And so looking at opportunities that you may feel like you missed out on, hopefully can create something within where people kind of talk about change, right? Change is ever present, and change is a constant. Things will constantly change. But keep in mind that although things do change and they don't always work out in your favor, when you have goals and you have things set, you know, mentally prepare yourself sometimes for a setback. But at the same time, you shouldn't stop pursuing whatever that is. And so having goals, setting goals, and when you feel those times where things are uncertain or you feel alone, start to think about what you can do for others. It'll help you kind of pull yourself out of that hole, and it'll also help encourage someone else along the way.
Very well said, Mr. Johnson. I really appreciate that. I also want to add on to that and say, you know, yeah, we are in some times where everything is up in the air. We're in times of uncertainty, and you know, when you think about somebody, you do want to be with them. And one of my best friends and I, we started doing mental health Mondays together, where every other Monday we'll schedule an hour or two just to debrief, talk about literally anything and everything. And it feels really good because, well, we are doing what we can do with what we have, with our resources and our strengths, instead of focusing on, man, we can't go out, we can't do this. And well, that's just the fact. We are not allowed to gather in large groups, and that's okay. We can still do what we can in the meantime to make ourselves a little happier, a little healthier.
Speaking of making ourselves a little bit happier and healthier, I know right now, especially on social media, cancel culture has become such a big pressing topic. You know, sometimes people are going out of their way to slander someone else's reputation because they think that this is their form of activism, that they're making a change. And, you know, some people are not necessarily agreeing with someone who's in fault, but, you know, defending them because they think it's not right. So how do you go about just seeing cancel culture and how that affects you, and how to deal with once you see that much negativity, especially with people you know?
That's a hard one for sure. So when I see the negativity, and when it shows up as an extreme, where, you know, the pressure of making people feel like I have to side with this group, otherwise I don't belong. You know, sometimes, at least for me, the best thing for me is I just remove myself from the situation and do other things for me to contribute to whichever, you know, signing petitions or just staying active but silently. And, you know, some people might not agree with that, and that's okay. We're all different people and we're all walks of lives, but you know, again, going back to the whole self-care thing, it's like knowing when to set those boundaries when it does get to you. And sometimes it's the best thing to do, even though it's difficult.
Right, and I would I agree with what Nicole said. One of the the things that I would also suggest is, with the whole cancel culture thing, the reason I think it's really popular is because people feed it, right? So people feed it either by submitting their own fuel to it, or they feed it by by being silent and watching. I think especially during these times, it's really important to know what you stand for, and I think people are in flux with that, or they really haven't thought about it. So it's easy to jump on someone else and bash them because number one is being done behind a screen name, or two, it's easy to do it because you don't have to have a conversation with that person, typically face to face, especially right now with school and a lot of things being shut down and closed. And so one of the things that you can do to combat cancel culture, and I know I keep repeating it, is setting goals for yourself, because in setting goals for yourself, what happens almost by default is you're going to ask yourself, or you should be asking yourself, how is what I'm doing going to help me get to my goal? Because if you ask yourself that question, or unless your goal is just to be a part of cancel culture, I guess then that wouldn't really work out for you. But I don't think anyone enjoys being a part of it. I think many people enjoy the fallout that comes from it. I think people see it as a reality show and they don't see people as people. But as Nicole said, just taking yourself out of it, it's probably the easiest thing to say, but at the same time, it's probably the hardest thing to do because you'll feel as if you're letting others down. But I think if people are being honest with one another, cancel culture is only enjoyable when it's not you being canceled, right? And so, I think obviously leading with empathy, putting yourself in another person's shoes, and realizing that more people have more things in common than they do have than differences, but trying to relate what those commonalities are, I think will help with the whole cancel culture thing.
Right. And do you think that calling people out on social media is always toxic, or, at what point does it get out of hand? Because there's people like, for example, Fernandez, it was on Netflix. She abused her son and her son unfortunately passed away. I think that's a universal no. I think everyone knows that's like completely not okay to do. So at what point does using your social platform become negative when calling someone out? Or is it always negative?
Can I answer that?
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
No. Actually, Mr. Johnson, go ahead. I think you would bring in really good insight about this.
Oh, okay. I think sometimes leaning into the discomfort of having those what I would call crucial conversations with people, to let them know where you stand, is okay. But, and there's a big but, state what you believe in a way that is respectful, even when you disagree. And then you gotta have to leave it at that, like, because what typically, or at least what I've experienced and seen, is someone will start off many times saying what they disagree with in a respectable way, and then then someone else will say something, and then it just gets worse and worse and worse and worse. And what you started off with good intentions, you end up involved in something that becomes counter to what you initially wanted. And so I think in being positive, and if you find yourself in a position where you're finding it difficult to be positive, let what you said that was positive stand, and remove yourself from that conversation, or delete that person or people as friends, because there's nothing that's going to come, nothing good is going to come from that. But I do believe in, because sometimes it takes a person or people to say what's right, and then other people feel emboldened and encouraged to say something right as well. But you have to have it be in a positive light, and you have to be strong enough not to respond, even if the other person continues with the negative.
Just to add on to that, at least my own personal way of life is everyone has their own battles. Everyone has their own roots. They grow up with different beliefs than we do. Sometimes that, you know, what I believe might not be the same for, let's say, Destiny or Mr. Johnson or Nicole. Like, we might not all have the 100% the same beliefs about just things, you know, everyday life, just big philosophy or big concepts, whatever it might be, but they're still a person. And sometimes, like, we have to understand that, you know, they might not know what we know. They might not know the things that, you know, I've had to educate, you know, my family, even in Mexico, about, you know, why you shouldn't be saying the N-word, or why you shouldn't be doing certain things, or posting certain things, or why certain things are bad or look bad, or so of course there's times where we have to have those conversations, because if we isolate people, in that, especially because cancel culture is just that, isolating people because of, you know, things that we don't agree with them about. So that can actually push them away from them seeing eye to eye of what we want them, like the same knowledge that we have. They might not be willing to listen anymore because we're isolating them, we're canceling them, we're exposing them. You know, there might be people that have said really hurtful things or very discriminatory things in the past, and they're being brought up now. And sometimes those certain people might be now, even though they've acknowledged that they've done something bad or whatever, because people are attacking them, they're less willing to hear the other side. And so if we really want to change people's minds, or at least be more helpful in educating them, we have to be able to handle those conversations respectfully, because it is another human behind that screen. I think it's very easy for us to forget that, you know, it's not just us sitting in front of a phone or sitting in front of a computer. There's another person on the other side of the computer, on the other side of that phone, that's taking in all this information. And so if you're just saying very mean things, or bullying them, or canceling them for things that they've done in the past, or that they're not necessarily familiar with why it's bad now, or things like that, then it's going to be a lot harder to have conversations where, okay, this is the knowledge that I know, and this is what I am seeing is from my own perspective. If you do it in a respectful manner, they're most likely to understand your perspective as well.
And thank you all so much for sharing everything. I took a lot from that. Hopefully everyone else who came here today also gained as much as I did. I think I was really excited to be the moderator today, because I'm always really big on mental health and hope. That's something that I strongly advocate for, just because I think it's super important and a lot of people look over it. So I was really excited to be here today and just go over those topics and answer those questions. Just before we kind of close off, could each of the speakers share just one way quickly how students can take care of themselves and stay hopeful?
Yeah, so one thing that I would recommend is to remind yourself of the good things that you have in your life, your strengths, your resources, and your friends, your family.
Jumping right behind that, I would say it's very important how you start your day and how you end your day. So start with something positive, then with something positive, and then just remember the best way to help people over the long run is to ensure your needs are met first.
I would say possibly taking care of yourself physically, going out for a walk, doing some sort of physical activity. That always helps energize yourself, even if it's not, you know, we're not able to go to the gyms, or maybe you can, I'm not sure, depending on where you are. But just going out for a walk, you know, even taking your dog out for a walk if you have a dog. I have a cat, so I can't really do that. She escapes from me, but just doing something physically could help you, you know, because the mind and body is one. So that's something that I would suggest.
Thank you all for sharing light on every topic we went over today. I really appreciate it. I was really happy being here today. For those of you that came to the Zoom today, if you have any follow-up questions, or you know you didn't feel comfortable submitting it today, or it doesn't ring a bell until later, the emails of Mr. Johnson, Fernanda, and Nicole will be sent in a follow-up email. So in case you want to get in contact with them, you definitely can. But on that note, this was the end of our very successful talk outside of our bubble. I really enjoyed it. So I hope everyone else had a great time being here today. I know I did.